my name is Jess and I'm about to film my first ever wrap-up video for September. I read a total of 7 books in the month of September, which is quite good for me, so let's just get started with a review, shall we? So the first book I read this month was Past Perfect by Leila. Past Perfect is the story of Chelsea Glazer, who for her entire life has worked at a colonial reenactment village in Virginia with her parents. So at the start of the novel, Chelsea is starting another summer working there with her best friend and her ex-boyfriend, and all three of them start to participate in this sort of sabotage war with the Civil War reenactment village that is across the road for them, that they have always been in competition with. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a super fun, fluffy, contemporary read with a really quirky and unusual setting. I am a massive history geek and I really thought it was interesting to sort of see inside history reenactment villages because I've always wanted to go to one of them. So Chelsea's day-to-day work was just really fascinating for me, and it was just really interesting to read about that in a YA book. I felt like Chelsea herself was quite an enjoyable narrator, and the rest of the characters that populated the book also had their little quirks and their little personality nuances that made them really fun to read about. One of my only criticisms for this book is that I feel like some of the relationships changed and developed a bit too suddenly to be realistic, and I definitely felt as if the ending was a bit too abrupt and could have used a couple more chapters just to sort of round it off and give the book a much more complete feel to it. Another thing I really liked about it was the theme of the past. So Leila really looks into the dangers of looking back into the past and focusing more on the past than you do on your future, and how that can be damaging. And this is a theme that I definitely haven't seen explored in many YA books, and I thought that she carried it off really well. So overall I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars, so check it out if you're feeling interested. Next book I read in September was Love, Rosie by Cecelia Ahern. I'd seen the film of this with, oh, I almost pointed at him then when I said Lily Collins, with Lily Collins and Sam Claflin in it, and I really enjoyed it. And when I saw this book for £1 in a charity shop, £1, I had to pick it up. So Love, Rosie is the story of Alex and Rosie, who are two Irish people that have been best friends since the age of 5, and it follows their friendship and their maybe more than friendship between the ages of 5 and 50. It's written completely in correspondence, so in letters, instant messages and emails that they shared with each other and with other members of their respective families, and this made the book really fast-paced and really fun to read. It sort of felt like you were reading little like private tidbits, it's a nice word, their lives, and that made for a really enjoyable read for me. Because it spans like 45 years, you can get quite frustrated with this book because you just feel like you want the characters to act more than they are, because, you know, 45 years is a long time. But overall I feel like the ending was super satisfying, and it was a really lovely read. A benefit of following them for so long was that you started to feel nostalgia in a way for their lives. So when they were referencing things that had happened like 20-30 years ago in their lives, you felt nostalgic for them, and that was a really nice touch to make you feel more connected to the characters. So I ended up giving this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend having a look at it. The next book I read in September was Froi of the Exiles. It's a hefty sized book by Melina Marchetta. This is the second book in the Lumita Chronicles by Melina Marchetta, which is one of my favourite fantasy series of all time. It's young adult, but I feel as if it reads like it doesn't necessarily feel like young adult just because it looks into the lives of so many characters. Whilst many of the main narrators throughout the series are within the sort of YA age range, you get to experience the feelings of a lot of characters who are all different ages, which makes the whole world and the whole story feel a lot more well-rounded. So Froi of the Exiles picks up 5 years after the events of Finnegan of the Rock, and for those of you who don't know, the entire Lumita Chronicles follows the people of the land of Skoldenor. So Skoldenor is split up into all these different kingdoms and provinces, and the idea is that before Finnegan of the Rock, the kingdom of Lumita was taken over by an imposter king who killed the entirety of the royal family. So in Finnegan of the Rock, Finnegan, who is a boy from Lumitir, starts to try and find the lost heir of Lumitir to bring the people of his land home. It's a story inspired by identity and finding your people and your homeland, and it was really beautiful. And Froi of the Exiles follows a minor character from the series 5 years later. So in this book, Froi is sent to Charyn, which is a kingdom that's blamed for that assassination of the Lumitarian royal family all those years ago, and Froi is given the task to kill the king. However, when he's there, he meets some very interesting characters, such as the king's daughter, the Princess Quintana, and the king's advisor, Ahern. This was an absolutely beautiful novel. Any of you who have read Melina Marchetta's novels will know that if there is one thing that she does absolutely superbly, it's character development. Froi is not a particularly nice character at the start of this novel. He is snarky, he can be cruel, and if you've read the book before, you know that he's definitely done some things in his past that he isn't and should not be proud of. But the way that she deals with that and develops him as a character is really beautiful, and by the end of this book I just wanted to put my arms around Froi and give him a hug. World building that Melina Marchetta does is also brilliant. From the first book you're really used to one of the kingdoms, but the transition from that kingdom to Charyn in this book feels so real and wonderful. She gives all of these kingdoms these wonderful little nuances that makes them really feel real and different from each other, and it's just so enjoyable to read about. Overall, I felt like this was an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous read, and very possibly Melina Marchetta's best work to date, and this was absolutely doubtless for me 5 out of 5 stars. So the next book I read in the month of September was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So I had to read this for school, right? And I wasn't very happy about reading this for school because I tried to read it a few years ago and I ended up putting it down after about 5 pages. This time, however, I read the whole thing because, you know, I sort of had to, but I ended up enjoying it so much more than I thought I would. If you don't know the story of The Great Gatsby, it's essentially the memoirs, I guess, of this character called Nick Carraway, who is from quite a well-to-do family, and it follows the summer that he spent in Long Island in the 1920s, where he lived next door to this mysterious man, Great Gatsby, and witnessed kind of the love affair that took place between him and his married cousin, Daisy Buchanan. So this is considered like the great American novel by many people, and I felt quite a lot of pressure to like it when I started reading it, and there are definitely parts of it that are quite hard to like, if you know what I mean. I felt like Nick himself could be quite a pompous and hard to like narrator, and several of the characters, particularly Daisy and Tom, felt very shallow and vain and just not very fun to read about. But that doesn't mean that the story that they ended up telling with them wasn't really powerful and interesting. For me, the highlight of this book was the character of Gatsby himself. One of the most interesting things about this book for me is the fact that no matter how many people I speak to who have read it, they all have a very different idea of who Gatsby is. He's essentially a man who's built a life out of his dreams, and he's just a very interesting, dynamic character to read about. And I really loved the story, I loved the plot, I loved the themes, and I can't wait to analyse it in English class now, which is something I never thought I'd say. And I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. So 2 more books to go, and the next book I read in September was Quintana of Charyn, which is the 3rd book in the Lumitir Chronicles by Melina Marchetta. So as I said before, Melina Marchetta absolutely excels with character, and this final book to the trilogy was no disappointment. It was absolutely beautiful. I feel like everything she does with her characters, every arc and journey she makes them take, it just feels so profound to me, and I found it really hard to say goodbye to the characters in this book because I feel like the journey that they took was so powerful. Melina Marchetta said when she started writing Finnegan of the Rock that the inspiration for this trilogy was seeing and hearing of several refugees in her country. The sort of pain and hope of these characters really comes through on the page. The epilogue of this book absolutely shattered me. It's right up there with the Clockwork Princess epilogue as far as I'm concerned. There's not really too much I want to say about this book that I haven't said with Froi of the Exiles, because I don't really want to spoil you all for this amazing trilogy, but all I would say is I would definitely pick it up. I would pick anything by Melina Marchetta, and of course this was a 5 out of 5 stars. But the final book I read this month, that I just finished reading this morning actually, was Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. So this is the 4th book in the Throne of Glass series, and it was glorious. It didn't quite live up to my expectations for me, and it hurts to say that, but it's just because Heir of Fire, which is the 3rd book in the series, was so utterly amazing. It was just like this explosion of action and character development and world building and awesomeness. It felt like it was just too hard for Queen of Shadows to live up to. However, I still thought this was an absolutely amazing read. If you can't already tell from this wrap up, character development is something that's really important to me in fantasy. I feel like a lot of fantasy books will sacrifice character in favour of plot, but the journey that the main character of this series takes definitely proves me wrong on that account. If you look at how she was in the 1st book to how she is now, you'll see what I mean. The world building and the fae in this was absolutely amazing. I especially loved all paragraphs by the leader of the Iron Teeth Witches, Manon. So the Iron Teeth Witches are a race of witches that essentially have iron teeth, and they fly these massive beasts, and they're so cool. The last sort of 100 pages of this book was just an explosion of action that my head is still reeling from. The 4th book out of a 6-book series, and I'm so excited to see where she's going to go with it. There were a few bits that I didn't really like. Whilst I was absolutely amazed by the last 100 pages of this, as I said, I did feel like some of it was a bit confusing, and I also felt like some of the relationships and some of the characters in this book, while well drawn, were a little bit off point, if that makes sense. Kale, for example, I felt didn't act like Kale as much in this book, which I found a little disappointing because I'd really loved his character, who had been such a big part of the past 3 books. But overall, I have a lot of faith in Sarah J. Maas and Sarah J. Maas's storytelling ability. I think that she is just a story master of sorts, and I cannot wait to see what she brings out with the other 2 books. So I gave this book a 4.75 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend jumping on this series train if you haven't already, because it's really good. Right, so those were all 7 books I read in September. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.